Okay.
And
Well,
we're recording.
Let me call to order the meeting of the Municipal Accountability Review Board for our March 10, 2022 meeting. I'm going to be, I'll just give a few opening remarks, then I'll turn it over to my co-chair, designee of the treasurer, Christine Shaw. I'm Jeffrey Beckham. I'm acting secretary for the Office of Policy and Management. I've been on the job less than 2 weeks, and I will hopefully be able to reach out to most of you in the coming weeks to introduce myself individually. I had a chance to talk to the treasurer yesterday afternoon, talk about the board a little bit. I need to talk to Christine directly, I think, at some point very soon. We'll do that as well. But I'm happy to be here. It's a steep learning curve on these issues, but I hope to get up to speed quickly. I know this board's done a lot of important work over the years, and we have a lot of important work ahead of us. And I look forward to diving into that. And with that, Christine, if you have any opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Beckham. So I would say that you may only be in this particular role for a couple of weeks, but I know that we've had the privilege of working together over a number of years. So your experience in government serves you well in this role. The work of the MARB is at a critical juncture, and especially as it relates to certain key issues around ongoing monitoring and deliverables on issues of interest, let's just say. So we are excited to continue this work to get these towns that are under MARB oversight to a place of fiscal stability, which I think is the objective for every one of the towns under our oversight. So with that, I turn the table back over to you.
Thank you. I'll be relying on Julian Freund, who works with us here at the Office of Policy and Management, who I understand acts as sort of the unofficial secretary of the board. Julian, I understand we have a public comment period during which members of the public may speak. So if we have that available, I'll just say to those who are waiting to speak, please wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. And please limit your comments to 2 minutes. Julian, I'm going to let you meter who comes on then. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak? And if you are speaking, please give your name and the city or town where you reside. That would be appreciated. Thank you. Julian, do we have any speakers?
It does not sound as though we have anybody interested in speaking.
Anyone wishing to be heard during the public comment period? Okay. We will move to item 3 on our agenda then, which is approval of the minutes from the February 10, 2022 regular meeting. As I was not a member of the board or in attendance, I will not be voting on this item, but does anyone have any discussion of the minutes, the draft minutes? If not,
motion, please.
Yes, I was going to say.
I move acceptance of the minutes of the last.
Thank you. We have a motion made by Christine Shaw, seconded by, I didn't see.
Matt Brockman.
Matt Brockman. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Any abstentions? All right, Julian, are we good with that item?
We are good with that item.
All right, we'll move on to item 4. City of Hartford subcommittee update. I believe a written update was provided in the meeting materials. Julian, can you give us a brief update?
The Hartford subcommittee did meet in February, and the major item on that agenda was the presentation of the city's FY 2021 audit. We had a presentation from the city's auditor, Clifton Larson. And the auditor had issued an unmodified opinion on the city's audit with no findings. There was one loan recommendation in the management letter which was for the Board of Ed to develop some policies and procedures related to accounting for grants, similar to the policies and procedures the city has in place. Financially, the highlight was the city did add about $2 million to its fund balance for a final fund balance as of June 30, 2021 of $31.8 million. And you'll recall, or you may recall from prior projections, that's roughly in line with what the city was projecting around the close of the 21 fiscal year, a little bit higher than prior projections. We also received an update from the city on their ongoing mitigation measures, and the next meeting of the subcommittee is March 24th. We'll be taking our first look at the Board of Ed's FY23 budget. And then in April, I believe we will have at that point the mayor's recommended budget for FY23. And that's all I have on this item.
Do any board members have questions of Julian or of the subcommittee? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 4B, the monthly financial report. City's monthly financial report was included in the meeting materials, and I believe we have a representative of the mayor who can provide us an overview. Since I'm new, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yep. Good morning, Secretary Beckham. I'm Jen Hockenhall. I'm the CFO for the City of Hartford. I'll be here to talk about the monthly reports and answer any questions you might have. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and jump into that unless there's other questions. Okay, great. Thank you. So as you can see, the city is currently projecting to be net favorable at the end of the year by about $2.3 million. That's an improvement of $1.9 million over last period. However, $1.4 million of that is because there was some confusion on the municipal revenue sharing and whether or not we would be getting what we had actually budgeted for. It turns out that the information that we received from OPM on the funds that wouldn't come in to the city was something we hadn't budgeted for. So there was just some confusion on our part. So talking with Julian, and as always, thank you, Julian, so much for talking through that with me. I really appreciate it. We have restored that $1.4 million in our budget. So really this month to last month, there hasn't been a significant change. In our revenue, the items that did increase that are looking more favorable are licenses and permits. That increased due to some incoming fees that are new this year for multifamily housing. So we received around $200,000 in January for that. So we'll keep an eye on that and do some projections for next year. And then also we had some increases in charges for services, mainly due to our increase in site plan reviews and some special events. So special events are picking up. You know, we weren't really sure last year during COVID how they would pan out, but things are looking good. So we're increasing our projections for some special events. And then on the expense side, it's pretty flat on the expense side here. We did see some increase in our police overtime this year or this month that's been offset obviously by some attrition. So we showed about $388,000 unfavorable change in our personnel line item, but that's offset by the HMIA contract amount that we had set aside in contingents or in our mitigation or our attrition line item for the HMIA contract. So really our personnel really was flat this month. I do expect to see that improve month over month now that I feel like we're on a good footing with police overtime and fire overtime. I don't believe we're going to need any more increases in those two line items. We're watching that very carefully. So I do believe though going forward that attrition should really start ticking up and we'll see additional favorability month over month going forward. We had a small decrease in our estimated cost for our health insurance rebates that we got from HR. So that was about a $50,000 improvement in that line item. And then our utilities, at the beginning of the year, we saw a huge increase in our water bills due to some technical issues with our pools and our splash pads. That was a beginning of the year issue. That's no longer an issue now, but that did increase our expenditures in our water line item and our utilities. And also we're seeing an increase in gas prices. So that's why our utilities line item is unfavorable, but we're continuing to watch that, and that decreased by about $88,000 this year. So that's what we have recorded in our financial statements. We didn't increase our property taxes yet, but our current property taxes are very strong. They're coming in very, very strong. We didn't want to increase anything until we got our collections through February. So you'll see an increase next month. Not quite sure where that will land. We're still looking at that. We just closed the books last night. So we'll have a better sense when we come back next month, but things are looking positive for us. The other item to note is that these numbers don't include any increases that we'll see in any union contracts that are currently under negotiation. So we have 1716 HPU, which will be for next year, and our municipal lawyers. So those are our 3 current contracts that we're negotiating, and we don't have anything factored into this for any potential increases there. So that's all I have unless there's any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do board members have questions for Hartford CFO? Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Beckham. My question really is asking Jill to maybe provide a little more information on Hartford's exposure to increasing energy costs, both on the city side and the Board of Ed side. How many, I guess the issue is how locked in and through what period is Hartford in terms of gasoline, heating fuel, propane, natural gas, and so forth, if you know the answer to that question.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I don't have any of that information at my fingertips, but I'm happy to provide something at the subcommittee meeting if that's acceptable.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Will do. Thank you.
Mr. White.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Jennifer, a question on the tax valuation. There has been some conversation among commercial entities that implementing the existing rate with a much higher valuation is going to adversely affect development in the downtown. Without giving away things that you're not ready to say, what kind of options is the 2 years ago, we were terribly afraid that the valuations were going to crater. So I guess this is a good problem to have.
Yeah, I believe we'll come back with a presentation, I think, on our reval where everything came out and the rates. The mayor did a presentation or a town hall, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, and did mention that our valuations are up. Things are looking very good. So we do intend to talk about decreasing the mill rate. So that is on the table, something that we're talking about. Where that will land, we're not quite sure yet. But I do believe, and Julian, correct me if I'm wrong, is that something that we should be talking about at the next subcommittee?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay. All right, perfect. So we'll plan to bring more, but Mr. White, to your question, we're definitely looking at it, and we'll have a better update for you in a couple weeks.
I suspected you were.
Yeah.
Christine?
Thank you, Secretary Beckham. So it appears that the favorable variance in revenues more than compensates for the unfavorable variance and expenditures. And you had mentioned specifically utilities, the spike there was by virtue of a problem that's since been addressed. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, it's one thing to have one-shots revenues unexpected. It's not a bad thing, but the unexpected expenditures, I just want to kind of get a sense from you whether you feel you can contain those unexpected spikes.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. So what we do have contingency that is available. So I believe our contingency amount that we put in our budget annually is roughly $2 million. We budget and forecast for our contingency as though it's fully spent. So we always have that in our back pocket as something that we can lean on. We go back and forth in our department, actually, how we should present that, if it should be that we're going to consume it all. So, and we know that we have that contingency there to offset things like our utilities. And we also assume, since we're doing our attrition only through the current, what that we've actually seen plus 1 month. We also are hopeful, well, hopeful and not hopeful, right, that we'll have these attrition savings in the upcoming months, but we're very conservative in that. So to your question, I don't believe that we'll have an issue at the end of the year. This utility was a hit that we saw it at the beginning of the year. We've got the contingency there in case we need it. But I think we're managing to the budget very well, and hope that I don't foresee anything happening that would preclude us to have an over budget at the end of the year.
Thank you.
Mr. White, you still have your hand up on the screen here. Do you have a? No? Okay, you're muted.
Sorry.
Oh,
Mr.
Mr. Weisenberg. Yes, sir.
You were mentioning in the presentation that the balancing of overtime versus attrition. Can you provide, and this would be for the subcommittee, we're doing it on the board side, on the city side for fire, police, and city employees. I don't need to know positions. Let's say for the past 3 years, what have you been carrying for vacancies? Because apparently, historically, we have seen an overtime costs of X, which is fairly large, and an attrition, which is tend to balance. So if we could get a sense of continuing vacancies in those areas, that would help, because obviously the overtime is compensating for the vacancies. But it'd be nice to know if we have consistent annual vacancy rates of X that we have to look at for whatever planning purposes going forward.
Absolutely, we can get that for you for the subcommittee, Mr. Weisenberg.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, ma'am.
it's Kim. I would like to piggyback off of that conversation, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Jennifer, question, and Mark, I'm not sure if you referred to the head count report that she includes. When you talk about the variance column, which says $10 million out there pending on a variance, and in there, I believe that you loaded attrition is what I'm going to say is 5.4. And the difference between the 10 and the 5.4 leaves you with a savings of 4.6 right now to date. And so while we look at the front end of the variance under the payroll line, you're showing me an $800,000 savings. Not talking bennies, I'm really just talking the payroll side. Then that's when you're saying, if I would to look at as of January 31st, is this the fully loaded in the back at this moment, and the front end of the budget to actual is really just being on the conservative side?
When you say benefits, I'm sorry, Ms. Kennison, when you say benefits, are you talking about benefits or just salaries?
I'm not talking about benefits at all. Just,
yeah, it is just through. So our attrition, or what we're projecting is that every position will be filled within 4 weeks of the end of the year. So if my position is vacant today, we are forecasting that it will be filled in a month.
Okay, and that's when it's coming up with the 10 million in the back on the variance on your head count sheet.
Oh, the 10 million I'm sorry, the 10 million. Yes, that is correct. And then we have attrition baked into our budget and various. Yes, you are correct. Sorry. Yes.
Correct. And so the difference between that is $4.6 million.
Okay. Yep. Between what we have reported in our
variance on your head count page.
Yep.
Which is the 10 million variance. You've loaded in your budget 5 million. So you have a savings there of 4.6, but as I would call, your budget to actual is showing a variance of 847,000 variance.
That includes overtime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Weisenberg, you still have your hand up?
No, I'm trying to figure out how. Okay, is it lowered now?
It's lowered now.
There you go.
Other questions of the CFO for Hartford from the board? If not, we'll move on to item 4C, discussion of non-labor contracts. I understand there's a one-year agreement between the city and Aetna to provide parking space to Hartford schools. This is a contract between the city and Aetna since 2015. Let's see, is the city prepared to discuss this matter?
Yes, Secretary.
All right, please proceed.
Absolutely, thank you. So this is an annual agreement, I believe, that comes to the board every year. Last year's agreement came with a forecast of what we thought we would spend in the next year, and it came in really close. So last year we had forecasted 2022 would be about 130,000, and the agreement came in at 129,000. So we're spot on. It's an increase of about 3% over last year, and there was one more thing I wanted to say about this, and I did not write it down, and I have now forgotten. But it was negotiated by our legal counsel at the city, and was done through Claudio Bazzano over at the school district. So it was a collaborative effort between the school and the city to negotiate this contract. I don't know if there's any questions on that.
Questions of the board? Seeing none, I think we may be done with the city today. Ms. Kinnison, Mr. Freund, anything else for the city? City of Hartford?
No, sir.
Alrighty then, we'll move on to item number 5. Town of Sprague. I believe a written update was provided in the meeting materials for the town of Sprague. And Julian, can you give us an update?
Yes, the Sprague subcommittee did meet in February. It was their first meeting since November. And we were provided with an overview of the Board of Education's proposed budget for FY23. Superintendent Hull was there to present, and he has proposed a budget with a relatively modest increase of 1.6%, which is roughly in line with what had been built into the 5-year plan. He did draw some attention to a couple of variables that it may impact the budget in the short term. The state partnership health plan rates, as they become finalized. There are ongoing labor negotiations with the non-certified bargaining unit. And then, as was also discussed in the previous agenda item, fuel costs and the direction those are heading. We also received a series of updates on items related to the city's or the town's finance operations. This town has been working for a couple of years now on putting together a complete set of financial policies and procedures to resolve an audit finding that was repeated for multiple years. A complete set has been just about finalized. I believe it was completed this week with the review of a consultant that was helping the town with that project, and will be going to the Board of Selectmen for approval soon. So that is a significant project to have completed or is nearing completion, and down the road we'll hopefully resolve that and remove that audit finding. We also got an update on the timing of the audit. We're looking at the end of March to expect the final audit to be issued. We talked about the budget calendar and our hopes of being able to synchronize the town's budget adoption process with the MARB and subcommittee meeting schedule. Those hopes are still intact. We expect to have the Board First Selectmen's proposed FY23 budget available to review for the March 24th meeting. We got a little bit of an update on the proposal for or the plans for arriving at a plan for ARPA funding. So there have been at least one public forum. The Council of Governments that serves the Sprague area has hired a consultant to help out. We've heard a couple of times now that at the top of the list of priorities, cybersecurity has been identified. There's also interest in making either upgrades or replacements of streetlights And uh, some residents raised open space as another possible priority area at their public forum. And then one other item that was brought to the subcommittee's attention really is just to raise awareness at this point. I don't believe a whole lot is known. A sinkhole was identified at the Paper Mill Pond Dam, which is on a property that the town acquired several years ago through, I think, a tax foreclosure. An inspection identified this sinkhole. DEEP has been out at the site and has advised the town that they need to do an additional inspection and to monitor the situation. So the town is looking at engaging an engineering firm to do that inspection and is seeking grant assistance to help pay for that. And that's all I have for this item. The next meeting is March 24th.
All right. Questions of Julian by the board or the subcommittee? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 5B, review and discussion of the monthly financial report from the town. Is the first selectman on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
If you could just introduce yourself, I'm new here.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Cheryl Blanchard. I'm the first selectman here in Sprague.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. As far as our budget goes and our financials, pretty much everything is on a par year over year. Expenditures are slightly higher than last year, but not a great amount. And some of that is timing. Our tax collection, property tax collection, is up a bit from last year. Again, but not a really substantial amount. Our revenue sources, revenue looks lower than last year, but part of that is because of the capitalized interest from a GO bond that has not yet been applied. So it appears a little bit different. And other than that, there's not a lot financially going on with that. If I would be happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
All right. Questions of the board for the first selectman in Sprague? Any questions for Sprague today?
I do, Secretary Beckham.
Ms. Kennison.
Thank you. Cheryl, first selectman, one question, can you give us any update on, I know it was just a couple of weeks ago that we met, but do you have any additional update to add to Julian's report regarding the dam?
I have only just a very little bit of information, but I was able, one of the questions that DEEP asked when they were out is if there was someone that had worked there or had knowledge of how the system worked and everything there. So I actually did locate a person and spoke with him just this week. And I'm going to actually reach back out to DEEP and ask them to come back out and perhaps meet with him. The building where they're saying there's water in the basement, he said there was always water in the basement and they had sump pumps. And also where the sinkhole is, he said, is in the area of where the intake valves or pipes were from the pond to the building that's there was the fire suppression system, and that was the water that came in. So I think he may be able to provide a little bit more information, if nothing else, before we spend a lot of money. You know, see if there's something that maybe we can address a little bit differently. So I'm going to reach out to them this week to see if we can schedule a meeting with him.
Well, that might be some good news.
Well, I'm hoping, but you know, but just hearing him say, I felt very hopeful when he said, well, that building always had water in the basement. So
Okay.
It had to come from somewhere, you know, so I guess that might be information that might be helpful.
Got it.
And we are monitoring the existing hole. And then also to piggyback on Julie's report, we have met with the consultant from the Council of Governments, and she is going to be providing us with some assistance, but she's comfortable with the process that we're going through. So that's going to be helpful for us since we have very small staff. So.
Very good. I don't have any questions in regards to your financials. They seem like they're tracking in line. I don't know if anybody else does, but I want to know if the superintendent is on the line. Superintendent Hall,
I am.
how are you?
Good. How are you?
Just one question for you, if you don't mind. Can you just let me know how you're tracking your year end and
We are tracking pretty well, and we expect to return around right now around $100,000 back to the town.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Other questions for the town of Sprague? All right. Then the town of Sprague can go enjoy this lovely day, and we will move on to our next item. Item number 6, City of West Haven. Written update was provided in your meeting materials of the subcommittee, and Julian will give us a brief update.
So the West Haven Subcommittee did meet in February on the 22nd. There was considerable discussion about the credit card policy in the city, and the only thing I would sort of say to that is that we have been, we being OPM, is compiling some best practices to provide to the city in sort of a template form or as a tool to help sort of nail down that policy and align it with stronger controls and best practices there. We did get a brief update on the Cone-Resnick audit, which is also an item on this agenda, so we'll be hearing about that momentarily. The Board of Education budget was distributed, but was not an item of discussion. That will be on the next subcommittee agenda, and I'm currently taking any questions or requests for additional information that any members have based on the budget information that was distributed, and I'll take those and forward those to the Board of Ed so they have those requests in advance and can come prepared with the information in March. And then we also we did not get through all of the updated action plans. We did hear a presentation on the Human Resources Action Plan, which was the first iteration of that plan as a comprehensive plan to address the findings from the Human Resources Consulting Group audit or report that was issued back in 2019. And we also were provided the first comprehensive update and timeline for the filling of a host of vacant positions. And so those will be ongoing recurring items on the agenda as well. And we will pick back up next month with updates on each of the action plans, including the procurement and IT, and then the two related to human resources that I just referenced. And that's all I have in terms of a subcommittee update for West Haven.
Okay. Questions of Julian or of the subcommittee from the board members?
Just want to piggyback, if you don't mind, Secretary.
Ms. Kinnison.
I just want to bring to the board's attention, as many of you are aware, that from our last meeting until now, that there has been a change in the finance director. There has been a change in the finance director at the city. And so that we are all aware of that, and that Mr. Chaplinsky is no longer with the city, and that the mayor has appointed Mr. Jackson. I don't know if he is with us today.
We are here, Ms. Kennison. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Scott.
All right. If there are no further questions about the subcommittee update, we'll move on to the update on the Cohn-Resnick audit, and I believe Ms. Kinnison has a brief update.
I do. Thank you, Secretary. So at the time that I gave my last update, which was probably 2 weeks ago, no additional information was provided to Cohn-Resnick is what has been reported to me, and therefore that means that the payroll reports that were unreconciled and the backup did not tie out to any of those numbers. That leaves the city exposed on those expenses, and those expenses would then fall into a non-eligible category because the proper backup was not provided. So I want to alert everybody to that so that this should not be a surprise as the work was not completed. I just want everyone to realize that this type of information should be readily available when you're talking about issuing and giving grants out. At this time, therefore, Cohn-Resnick has moved forward and have begun drafting the report for OPM to be receiving, and we don't have a date at this very moment, but their contract ends as of March 31st, and we are anticipating that that contract will not be amended and that we should have a report issued by the end of the month at this very moment. That's what the plan is.
Kim, can you say the first part of what you said again? That some information was not provided to. You went very quickly, so I just want to make sure.
So sorry. I'm sorry.
We all heard that there was information that was requested by Cohn-Resnick that is not reconciled and requested.
The payroll. Yep, it's the same message that I had given last time. It has not changed. So Cohn-Resnick was provided payroll reports. Those payroll reports do not tie. So you'll recall that Frank had mentioned that within those payroll reports, they're a little bit more complex, and that other, I think it was other areas were included. So therefore, it wasn't distinct that the entire payroll report that was given was not related to the COVID grant. So it was not reconciled, is what I am told. And so Cohn-Resnick is hired to audit, not to do reconciliations. It is up to the town to actually provide, or the city to provide those reconciliations to the detail that backs the expenditures. And that was not, does not align, does not tie out. So, and again, apparent, whether the reason why it wasn't provided or wasn't reconciled, I can't answer those questions.
Well, if I can say from the city of West Haven, this is the first I'm hearing of it. Obviously, I've been here a couple of days, so I'm not surprised to be confronted with something that I have not heard before. We can certainly try to address that, and so I've made a note of it. However, our annual audit, and I just want to put this on the table plainly and clearly, our annual audit is on hold until such time as the Cohn-Resnick audit is complete, which, makes me nervous as this is, March 10th, and we do not have an audit and we don't really have a schedule of that. But after I complete my budget process with the mayor, that's going to be the next big thing that I try to address. Attorney Tiernan, did you have something to say on this?
Well, hi, good morning, everyone. Lee Tiernan. I do know that the prior finance director had a philosophical and professional disagreement over whether or not what was provided was adequate, and so I will revisit his thoughts with Mr. Jackson after this meeting, see if there is any way that we can come to a conclusion that's beneficial for all parties.
In addition to that, there's another thing I would like to add. So this information, I want everyone to be aware, Cohn-Resnick was hired in October to complete a forensic audit, a critical forensic audit, and we were told that we would have full cooperation from the city due to what has transpired, okay? And this audit was supposed to be completed and all the field work completed as of January 31st, okay? Before we were told that CLA would be coming on site to start their year-end audit, okay? Cohen had to continue to do field work into the month of February, okay, mid-February, and come on site. They actually clashed, and CLA was on site at the same time as Cohen-Resnick. I am aware of that. So again, I even asked, do you need additional staffing? Should you be hiring a consultant yourself to bring somebody in to address these grants? And so no additional resources were added to do this. So I'm assuming that you were able to handle all of this. Then you have also the final report. The final report is due 2 OPM in our portal. That was due as of February 15th. OPM has extended that date to February 28th. That portal has not been updated either for your final report. So I still see that you have financial systemic issues in being able to provide the proper information that should be readily available.
All right. I think there's been a full airing there. Does board members have a question? I'm sorry, help me with your last name, sir.
Valsigno.
Valsigno.
Nice to meet you, Chairman.
It's small print on my screen, and I'm nice to meet you, sir.
I can't see either, but I would like to say that I was elated to see that Mr. Jackson was chosen to head the finance department for West Haven, and after being on this committee for a few years, I think he's going to bring a level of professionalism to the system. But that being said, this just seems to be, as usual, a common theme where how your finance director isn't notified as a top priority that there's a certain portion of a forensic audit that is missing when you have less than a month left in a contractual obligation that you have with the auditors. This just seems to be a theme that continues on. And I just want to wish Mr. Jackson all the luck. And again, I believe he'll bring a level of professionalism that is needed. And I just wanted to make that statement. I hope there aren't any other pertinent and important information or issues that have not been brought to his attention. And if so, I think they have to be prioritized. And I also believe that the OPM needs to maybe itemize those things for Mr. Jackson, because it seems to me that he's not getting the information needed, and it certainly isn't within the correct time frame so that he can deal with the issues. Thanks.
Other questions of Ms. Kinnison about the update regarding the Cohen-Resnick audit from the board?
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Egan.
Mr. Egan, you're a voice. I don't see your face, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Just a question for Kim, and it's just maybe a lack of understanding on my part. Is there something that prohibits West Haven from completing their regular annual audit while the Cohen-Resnick audit is in process?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Egan, if I can dive in on that one, I met with the auditors yesterday, and for their professional ethical reasons, they indicated that they would not advance the year-end audit absent the information from the Cohen-Resnick.
And that's Mr. Jackson speaking?
It is indeed.
Nice to see you or hear you, sir. It's been some time. Just identify yourself, if you would, and seek recognition. That'd be appreciated. I think Mr. Hamilton was next.
Yes, thank you. A question for Ms. Kennison. Could you go over again the implication of the fact that the payroll records are not reconciled back to the general ledger? You seem to imply or suggest that it means grant funding will be lost. Is that correct? Or could you further elaborate on what the implications of that failure are?
Sure. The failure of that is that it would knock them out as not eligible. If you have supporting documentation and the supporting documentation doesn't tie out to what you're reporting, then it is not accurate.
Hey, for my edification, not eligible for
Grant funding.
the restructuring funds?
Yes.
Got it.
And
For
would
the
that
relief
then mean
funds,
West
sorry.
Haven?
Correct.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick follow-up. Would that then mean that the city would be obligated to refund those monies back to the federal government? Is that the implication? And if so, how much money are we talking about?
I don't know the dollar amount, but I can only imagine that payroll would be the heavier side of the report. I'm assuming that West Haven would know that information. I don't know those underlying details. I apologize. I don't get I only to ask for an update so that Cohen-Resnick's report can stay solid and independent. And I'm just the reporter until the report comes out because it's a forensic audit.
Mr. Hamilton, you good?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
I think Ms. Shaw was next.
Yes, thank you. And to follow on that line of questioning, Ms. Kennison, are there any implications for state restructuring funds that have been provided to the town of West? I know that there is a hold placed on restructuring fund dollars for this fiscal year or next fiscal year, but curious to know if there are other consequences for the city's failure to comply in good faith with the audit.
Their audit was really focused on the coronavirus relief funds is what Cohen was focused to do.
I understood that the scope of their review would also include the integrity of their internal controls, and to the extent that those internal controls also were the basis of observations of the subcommittee and this full board around ongoing audit compliance issues. I'm just curious to know if there's other recourse beyond the current $4 million that's on hold for the city.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think Mr. Brockman was next.
I was just trying to clarify the city would have to pay back the CRF. We're talking about the CRF funds, right? So they'd have to pay back the CRF funds to the state to then give back to the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So these were part of that pass through of account.
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we would, as the state would be sort of requiring the city to pay back whatever this dollar figure is determined to be. But I think
and keep in mind the audit started based on interim reporting.
Right.
The final reporting is what's to get uploaded into the system. Okay. That still needs to have their eyes set on the final reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I have a separate question as to how many other towns have not put in their final report. And I think maybe we could talk about that at a certain point as well. I think that's an interesting question. But
sure.
Back to West Haven.
It was a handful, but majority have completed.
Okay. But I think to Christine's point, I think if there are, as we've talked about with the other issues too, and I'm sure we'll get back into it when we get to the financial report, if there are other deficiencies that are found, I presume that this board would want to think about that with respect to beyond just the CRF implications.
Agree.
Mr. Falsigno, you still have your hand up on my screen. Is that just, do you have a question or?
No, I apologize. Let me lower my hand. I'll click it on my computer. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Any other questions for Ms. Kennison about her update regarding the Cohen-Resnick audit from the board? All right, we'll move on to item 6C, review and discussion of the monthly financial report for the city. Do we have the mayor or is Mr. Jackson, you going to handle this?
I'm not going to handle it because of the brevity of my tenure thus far.
Okay.
Mr. Malone, are you
I'm ready
prepared to
do
do
it,
that?
yes.
Mr. Malone, the OPM consultant, will take this one.
Hi, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay, good. We have one phone and there's about 5 of us. Good morning, Commissioner. Welcome and good luck. I'm Michael Milone, and my role is I'm the liaison between the Office of Policy and Management in West Haven. And my first year here, I worked pretty closely on the budget, and then when Frank arrived, he pretty much took full control over it. So I apologize if I can't dive as deeply as he might have been able to had he been here, but I do have some familiarity, and I do have at least an awareness of some of the anomalies that I think are significant and need to be reported. Otherwise, it seems as though things are trending pretty much as they have been, but with a few exceptions, which I will point out. And I also apologize for the format because I could not get access into the system. And it's probably just as well because I probably would have butchered the system. These are all developed on my own Excel spreadsheets, but tie back to all the Munis reports that we work from. So with that being said, what I tried to do was, as I said, look for the anomalies and the exceptions. Otherwise, the projections are pretty much consistent with what you saw last month. The one thing I did want to start by saying, and I'm looking at the general fund right now, and Julian had asked me if I could try to get more information on last year's audit. Obviously, it's not completed, but at the last month's meeting, I think we were projecting about a $2.2 million surplus for fiscal 21, and I got the general ledger from our assistant finance director, and it looks like it's more in the range of $2.5 million, coupled with the previous fund balance of $3.5 million. It would bring the fund balance up to about 6.1, but I want to underscore the fact that that is not an audited number, okay? Neither was the number that Frank had provided in the past, but at least the surplus is going in the right direction. Just by way of summarizing the revenues quickly, as I said, what I'll try to do is point out some of the exceptions. Most of them seem to be trending as we had expected. The one area that I want to spend more time on, and certainly I know Scott does, is with property taxes. They're trending well ahead of last year, but we do have a new tax manager. We want to make sure that whatever we're projecting is still consistent with what we were looking at last month, which is that we would meet our property tax budget appropriation. We have traditionally had tax lien sales in the spring, and they've been very robust and generally make up for a big part of the difference between where we are today and where we'll be on June 30th. So that's another thing we'll be checking on. But there is a bit of significant good news, and that is that we released our supplemental motor vehicle tax list about 6 weeks ago, and it will generate about $850,000 more than what we had appropriated in the general fund budget. Now, so as not to excuse the expression, bastardize these numbers, what I did was I left the numbers pretty much as is because I didn't want to change them in spite of the fact that we have a revenue increase until, I'm comfortable that everything else that makes up this property tax number, which are about 6 or 7 subcategories, are going to continue to trend as we had hoped, and that there won't be any changes. So to just add $800,000 onto this would be pretty irresponsible, not knowing whether or not everything else is on track. So working with Scott Jackson and the tax collector, next month we will have a pretty solid number, but I at least can tell you that based on the growth in the supplemental motor vehicle tax list, if all of that revenue were collected, it would generate about $800,000 to $850,000. The other area of note that I wanted to touch on, where there's a slight departure from budget, is what is the column with federal and state grants, non-MARB funds. We talked about this in the past, but again, just to kind of summarize everything for you, Commissioner, because this is, I think, your first time running through this. This is the account where our pilot payments are appropriated. And like all of the other municipalities, we put our budget together and had it approved before the state completed their budget. West Haven was the beneficiary of a pilot payment that increased by about $3.1 million, but correspondingly, the city had budgeted about $1.5 million in ARPA funds to fill that void in the budget. So that's why the offset is only about $1,495,000, because we already had used about $1.5 million, which obviously we're not going to use in ARPA funds, but we are receiving an increase of about 3.1 in the pilot. The next item that I wanted to mention is the charges for services, which also has seen what I think is going to be a dramatic increase in projected revenues as well. Last year, we increased the real estate conveyance tax. We doubled it. And in the process of coming up with this year's budget appropriation, obviously the city was a little conservative because we didn't know where we would likely end up. What we've seen is that the real estate market has continued to be as robust as it was last year and the year before. And so it looks at this moment in time as though we will probably generate about $400,000 more in real estate taxes than what we have listed in this category of revenues. And it could even go beyond that, but at this moment in time, I think we were being conservative, and it looks like we will see at least $400,000 more in charges for services. And then under other revenues, which is miscellaneous revenues, and I think Frank talked about this last month, but we've seen a lot of activity in the sale of West Haven property. This is where that money is appropriated. We've realized about $500,000 through the sale of various properties. In the last 2 weeks, there was another $305,000 realized in sale of properties. But in discussions with our corporation counsel, he indicated that at this moment in time, there's been no decision as to whether or not that money would go into the general fund or not. So basically, where we are today is I think we have, probably a likely increase in the real estate conveyance tax of about $400,000, another $500 to $800 in our supplemental motor vehicle tax. So the revenues are trending certainly a lot better than they had. But again, I underscore the fact that until we go through each one of these in a lot more detail, especially the property tax categories, I wouldn't bank on the fact that we could just collectively add that to our projection, which is why I didn't. By next month at this time, I think we'll all have a comfort level to better understand, what is happening with some of these other revenues, to determine how much of each of these additional revenues we're going to use. So there's the money from the real estate conveyance tax, the supplemental motor vehicle tax, and possibly the sale of real estate that will be rolled in some fashion or another. The other thing I wanted to point out, because it does stand out, is there's an operating transfer out of $388,450. When the budget is adopted, 0.13 mils is set aside in revenue for the capital non-recurring fund. So that revenue traditionally comes into the property tax account, and then at some point during the fiscal year, there's a journal entry that transfers it from the general fund
right there
into the capital non-recurring fund. And so that's why that appears as an offset. So with all said and done, we started with what looked like, and I will go through the expenditures, but at this moment in time, I'm comfortable that this projection that we used last month of $1,460,000 over revenue is still pretty solid. And then that's not adding in the three additional revenue items that I mentioned to you, all of which I think are going to be pretty significant. It's just a question of how much of existing collections and other revenues they might offset. So with all that said, right now we're looking at about a $621,000 surplus in this fiscal year. It will continue to rise with the use of those additional revenues. So I will stop at that point if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I'll just go on to talk about the expenditures.
Why don't you finish your report, sir, and then we'll take questions later.
Be happy to. Okay. Okay, the next report is the general fund expenditure report. And I think some of the variances here that are less than positive have been discussed in the past, but again, just to bring you up to date, again, in going through this, there weren't any aberrations but one, and I'll explain that. One of the things I did want to mention is that the finance director, Scott Jackson, will be meeting with all of the departments over the next week and a half. And so in the development of next year's budget, obviously, a big part of that will also be reconfirming the estimated expenses for this year. So just as we'll be able to provide hopefully a much more aggregate collective of revenues, I think that we'll probably have even a better handle on the expenditures, having had the opportunity to talk to each of the department heads and work through all of these numbers with them. But for the time being, they seem to be trending as they have been for the last couple of months. So the variances haven't changed. But just to point out a couple of things, in public service, that represents the police department, and the story there is unchanged. I think we have 7 or 8 vacancies, and as a result, it's put a lot of pressure on the overtime budget. It's put pressure on the police manpower overage, which is the account that they charge to when they have to call in officers for duty that has to be covered, and they don't have anyone assigned because of the depletion of the staffing. And there's also separation pay that gets paid out when people resign. So it's been those 3 that have consistently been driving this overage. Otherwise, most of the other accounts seem to be very much in line. The money from the vacant positions obviously is going a long way to mitigating some of this, and it could continue to mitigate it more. So it's possible that this 292,000 shortfall that you see in public service could go down. Public Works, it has just a couple of major accounts that really were out of whack. One of them is a major problem that was that resulted at the police department relative to an HVAC maintenance issue, which at least initially is about $125,000. And so most of this overage is really related to that. There are some overtime issues in the Public Works Department, but not significant, again, because of vacancies. As I go down the list, the city insurance account is projected to be over budget simply because of the fact that claims are running higher than expected. There's 2 elements that make up that account. One is the public liability insurance, and then the other one is the public liability for claims that have to be paid because we don't have first dollar coverage, we have stop loss. And I spoke to the risk manager this morning, and she's well aware of this and has it, very much under control. And we didn't have the time to go back over the projection, but she's going to work on that for Scott and myself, and I'm hoping, because this is a projection, we haven't come close to hitting that $1,054,000 that Frank had projected, and she wasn't sure why. So that will require a little bit more review, and hopefully it's overstated, but I can't say that until we've completed our analysis. As you go down the page, the other, or the exception from last month's report is the COVID expense. What's been done with the COVID expense money is it's been run through the general fund. It was the mayor and Frank's decision to make sure that all of that money was reflected in the operating budget to ensure that it was incorporated into our overall projections of whether there would be a surplus or a deficit. And so if you remember from looking at last year's report, the majority of the expenditures and revenues were charged there, and this is still material that happened after July 1st and up through December, I believe, that is basically the result of a journal entry from this special revenue fund into the general fund. Okay, so these are expenses that had been incurred prior to this period, but are now being actually transferred into the general fund so that all of that expense is clearly identified in one place. And obviously, should the city have to make some reparations for some of this, it's incorporated into the fund balance, and it certainly is a more transparent way to, I think, identify the expense and the revenue and any potential payments back to the federal government or the state government that have to be made. And I think that pretty much covers the expenditure side. So I won't go into any more detail there. I was going to move on to the sewer department and just give you a quick overview of that. The budget for last year, I believe we're projecting about, I think, $1.6 million surplus. It looks like when I looked at the general ledger, it's probably going to be about $1.354 million. So we'll be able to, once we get the audit, determine the variances as to why it's a little bit less. But the important thing is it's positive. It's $1.354 million, and it would bring the fund balance in the sewer department budget up to about $6.2 million. $6.2 million. And again, that's unaudited, and it could change slightly, but they do at least have, at this moment in time, a relatively strong surplus. The one issue that, and the revenues are tracking as we expected, and I wanted to make one correction as I look down at my report. If you look under the column January 21st, year-to-date percentage forecast, it's the third from the end. Down at the bottom, it shows a percentage of 7.0% for charges for services, and I don't know how that happened, but that's not the right number. It should be 83.4%, and I apologize. I went back to look at my documents today, and I realized somehow or other that number got drastically misrepresented. But in any event, the revenues are tracking as we had hoped. My hope is that they'll exceed budget, which they have in the past, but it was too early to make that determination. But there is a projection of a $463,000 shortfall, and that's primarily because of what's happening in the fixed charges portion of the budget. You could see that we have $1.292 million budgeted, and Frank was projecting about $2.107 million. To date, we've spent $1.4 million. And the problem there is that in August, there were 3 major rainstorms, monsoons, if you will, and we had an inordinate amount of sewage backups to the point where I think we, according to the risk manager, had about 60 claims filed against the city. And so far, the total spent on those claims has been about $600,000. There is a stop loss insurance, but it doesn't start until a $50,000 per claim limit. And this includes not only payments made to homeowners, but it's also the cost of paying for the services associated with cleanup and also appraisals and so on. So it's a collection of expenses, but the primary part of it is the settlement of the claim with the homeowner. I asked if there was any opportunity for any subrogation, and I guess I showed how naive I was, because it was made clear to me that the homeowner's insurance will not cover any of this. So this is all going to be on the city. But what, again, I'm going to be doing is working with the risk manager just to determine whether or not the projection that Frank was using is still in line, or is there a likelihood that we could reduce it. But other than that one account, this is all trending pretty consistently with budget. Should we end the year with this $463,000 deficit or shortfall. We do have a contingency that hasn't been touched, which has a balance of $300,000 in it. And we also have the opportunity to use some of fund balance should we have to, but we're a long way from there, and my hope is that between some revenue increases and maybe some more positive news on the remaining number of claims and their costs, we can bring this in line without having to do any of that. And then the last budget is the Allentown Fire Department, and Allentown has made an incredible turnaround from 3 years ago when they had a deficit fund balance. When we looked at this last month, I think they were projecting about a $690,000 surplus in 21. According to the general ledger, it's about $909,000. So if that number holds, it builds on their previous fund balance of $1,990,000, which brings their fund balance up to almost $2.9 million. Again, we have to wait for the outcome of the audit, but there isn't a lot of complication and complexity in this budget to the point where you're going to see major changes in audit adjustments. It's very minor. So I am hopeful and optimistic that that number of $909,000 for last year will hold. As we look at this year, a quick look sort of suggests that they're going to have a budget problem, but they won't, because what happened is they bought a piece of apparatus, a pumper engine, and it was about $711,000. The entirety of the pumping engine got charged through the general fund and is reflected here. It was supposed to be paid with primarily with about $571,000 in grants, and then the balance coming out of the operating budget from last year. They had a capital outlay appropriation. Anyway, so this is just a bookkeeping adjustment, and so if you look at the bottom of the page, you'll see that I have estimated grant reimbursement of $571,000, and so when that is applied to this budget, or when those two expenditures are taken out and applied to the special revenue fund, I'm not an accountant, so I can't tell you how it's going to be done, but the end result is that given all those things, and if everything holds constant, that the surplus should be somewhere in the neighborhood of $946,000. And then the other good news here is they're also the beneficiary of part of the large increase in the supplemental motor vehicle tax as well. And if all stays as is, it could generate another $100,000 for the fire department in Allentown before the end of the fiscal year. So I think that pretty much concludes my statements and information, and apologize if I went a little too quickly, but I know you've had a long morning and I didn't want to make it any longer, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do board members have questions concerning any of the information presented?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Secretary and Julian. This is David Biller.
Mr. Biller, please proceed.
So question, and it might be a minutia question, but something that I do know something about. I just wanted to back you up to the claims process that you had discussed and that you had mentioned with the sewage problem there in West Haven. And I am in the business of handling claims and in the industry, and I know that that's been a problem and an issue in West Haven for many, many years. But what you had said about these claims not being covered by homeowners policies, now that's something that historically was true, but has changed over the past few years, and most homeowners insurance policies actually contain an endorsement, sometimes limited, but an endorsement nonetheless for water or sewage that backs up or overflows through sewer sumps or drains. And in some cases, it's $5,000, $10,000. In some cases, it's more or less. So I guess my question is there someone, because I know it can become an issue and you can get hit with a few hundred claims at a time, and even if it's $5,000 here and $10,000 here, repetitively that adds up. is there some process by which each of these claims is looked at? Is there some obligation on the part of the homeowner that they first check with their insurance company to see whether or not, in fact, they have that kind of coverage, and then come back to the city for, say, like another insurance? Or is it just automatically assumed and the city automatically accepts liability?
David, I have Corporation Counsel Lee Kiernan here, and he's going to be prepared to answer that question for you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Mr. Biller. Yes, we always
Mr. Kiernan, how are you?
Good. How are you? On all
Good, thank you.
insurance claims, we look for double dipping, so we're always looking to verify that whether homeowners insurance covers or doesn't cover. But in addition to that, in West Haven, and I think unique to West Haven, we're also involved with a USDA program, which is identified as a retreat policy since Storm Sandy, and we try to take houses that have excessive number of backup claims just off the grid completely, and that program continues. I think it'll be wrapping up maybe this year or within the next 18 months, but we have taken several properties offline. So we are trying to battle this on 2 levels. We also, believe it or not, get in a tussle, where is the sewage line and who's at fault? But when you have major storms, it makes my job difficult to make a legitimate argument that the homeowner is not responsible. But we try to follow
It
up
certainly does.
Yeah,
It certainly does, and I know those. I was going to say, I know those kind of claims can be, sort of a hot potato, but I guess my question is, when someone, because when I've received phone calls from people for these sorts of claims, they normally are $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 claims. So I guess my question is, when someone submits a claim to the city, is there some requirement or some policy by which they're first required to go to their homeowner's carrier and then produce, let's say, for the city, a letter of declination? So now they've got no other choice and then come back to the city.
Yes, and that usually results in them going to their city councilor, and so we have to be persistent and push back against that and make sure they do that. Then we give it to our third-party adjuster to do investigations, and then we even give it a third look before we resolve the claim. Third-party adjuster generally, though, will put an evaluation on the claim that assists us in whether or not we think we should pay a claim or not pay a claim, or pay a portion of the claim or not pay a portion of the claim. And we also
and are there? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say we coordinate with the sewer department on all these, whether or not we can change any activity we're doing so that to eliminate the claims completely.
And are there standing contracts with outside vendors, mitigation companies like ServiceMaster, ServPros, and that sort of thing? And if so, is that something that's put out to bid, or is that on a case-by-case basis?
We allow the third-party adjuster to do that. I can tell you, I've noticed. I mean, they generally use ServPro. But there's not limited to do that.
Okay. And so the third party adjuster has the discretion to bring in the vendor of his choice, his or her choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like in other states, if you have health insurance on your auto, when you start paying claims before the case is over, kind of thing. In concept.
Okay. And who oversees that process?
So the risk claims would come in. If they come into the city clerk or to my office, city clerk would hopefully forward them up to me, or they come into my office. I give them to the risk manager. The risk manager begins processing them. The third-party adjuster will then provide us with an evaluation. The claims are not left dormant for long because we always hear from the homeowners periodically. We do try to keep them updated. We know the stress that they're undergoing when they're in these claims. And then we have to make a decision as to what we're going to do. On rare instances, I would say less than 10%, they do result in litigation.
Yeah. Okay. And one last question. And the third-party adjuster, is that a contract that's put out to bid at some point, or is that also on a case-by-case basis?
Has been, needs to again. As we get our staffing levels in the procurement area in a better place, I'm hoping that it will get put out to bid again. When it was put out to bid, that's when we went from Kerma to them with a savings. But as you know, there could always be additional savings if we put that out to bid in the future. And I would imagine that will go out to bid once we have procurement staff in place within 6 months.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions of the board regarding information presented under this item?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Patrick Egan.
Mr. Egan, please proceed.
I just to follow up with that line of questioning, regarding most of the claims, is the claim due to some type of fault in the main or in the connection between the house and the main?
You have to include all faults, Mr. Egan. So one fault is that there probably are properties that should never have been approved for building. They were, forget about global warming, they were probably not in good locations to begin with. Secondarily, global warming. Third, part of the problems is occasionally we have certain shutoffs, we have more than we used to, but we can get a failure on a shutoff where we can mitigate some of these. But what we have noticed is in certain areas of the city, floodwaters are coming in, they're not dissipating like they used to, and it is probably causing more pressure in these areas. Gravity. It isn't, I mean, in the commercial side, you could get, where someone's not emptying their grease trap or something like that. But we scrutinize this pretty aggressively, and we're not finding that it's anything other than, climate, weather, acts of God kind of conditions.
And who evaluates, I guess, these claims to see if, evaluates it for alleged liability for the city as opposed to the homeowner's liability, which they own basically the connection from their home to the main. Who does that evaluation? Does that get submitted? You said you're insured for liability, general liability is Kerma?
No, we moved from Kerma to PMA.
Okay, and does that get submitted to one of PMA's adjusters to look at?
PMA reviews it, but in addition to that, there are individuals in our sewer department that review the same thing.
So who makes the determination of the liability, since that's a legal question? Does that go to the insurer?
Ultimately, the determination is made in my office if there's a dispute. So PMA would say, we've evaluated the claim, yada, 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 it's worth $14,293. We've verified what they lost. We have receipts for the freezer that got destroyed, yada, yada, yada. And so we review their analysis and decide up or down what we want to do, if we agree with it or don't agree with it. And then they process the payment.
So if PMA determines through their process that there isn't liability on the town through state law, through the holdings of the courts regarding, sewer lines and waste and stormwater and stuff like that, if they determine there's no liability, your office may determine that there is and pay the claim?
It depends on the response of the homeowner and the nature of the claim. But yeah, we might reevaluate. In the end, PMA doesn't have to try the case, I do. So in the end, if the homeowner doesn't agree and goes into litigation, I have to defend that decision. So I need to make sure I have expert witness testimony to defend that decision. So at that point, you also talked about how you're seeing a rise in these things due to climate change and storms, and when storms occur, these things have a more frequency of happening.
Is it just taken into account? Generally, the municipalities have a pretty good defense due to acts of God and things you can't control.
Look, when someone's basement is full of raw sewage, that causes anxiety, and you would have to be 100% sure that there was no fault of the city for that happening. You would have to develop a system where people hook up to the sewer system, and you would have to say, oh, by the way, you're on your own here. We'll process it if it gets to us, but if it doesn't, you're on your own. That's not the system we have, not the system we can enforce. So, the sewer system in West Haven is over 100 years old, a lot of users. We have users in Orange. We can't go to a system where we can transfer liability at this stage. As I've said, we engaged aggressively in the USDA program for the retreat process to remove houses from the system that were excessive claims, just like the federal government did on the flood insurance situation. That has been effective. We would probably have far more claims had we not done that. But as we're getting areas of claim that we didn't have in the past, so we're going to have to make adjustments and see if routing water and investing money in our stormwater system that we haven't done to date is going to be effective in mitigating that.
Okay, I would just leave off with that. Most of the systems in the state with municipalities are decades and decades old, and that generally it's been held that can't, especially for issues of storms and things that cause these things, and even when the system itself is a little antiquated because populations grow and whatnot, that generally the courts have held that municipalities really don't carry that liability. I just don't understand why a claim would be paid if generally there is certainly a good defense to that liability. I don't think there needs to be a determination of 100%, but I would just leave off with that.
Other questions of the board for the information presented for this item? All right, hearing none, there's another item regarding a non-labor contract involving installation of solar panels. This is an item for the review of the board. There's no action required, but is there an overview that can be provided regarding this non-labor contract?
Mr. Chair, this is Scott Jackson. We have Attorney Tiernan and Grants Coordinator Doug Coulter available to discuss this item.
Thank you.
Tiernan, you want?
Yeah. So, it's a 40-page contract with attachments. I am going to just give a quick summary, and I guess if people have specific questions, they can. We are trying diligently in areas of the town where we think we have the ability to maximize solar power. We started aggressively with our high school rehabilitation project. When we got involved in the high school project and we had a solar consultant, we started to leverage that solar consultant to see about other solar projects in the city, and this is one of the dividends it's paying. So basically, what the consultant does is the consultant takes care of the bidding and reviewing different opportunities for this, and we've utilized the consultant in other non-school solar project bidding and been happy with the result. And what the city gets is one of two things. The contract does not require that the city buy 1 kilowatt, but the presumption is that the city is going to get in a fixed way less expensive kilowatt hours that they can then put into the budget system, pay less in electricity, and that will be a budget savings. Or conversely, the energy gets sold and the city gets a credit. So it's very difficult to see how you lose here. And the way the bidding goes is, frankly, who's going to pay you the best price? As anyone knows what's going on with Ukraine, projections on where energy costs are going to be, you'd have to be better than Nostradamus. But we're pretty happy with this contract. We think it provides a good deal for the city. If we bought all the electricity produced, it doesn't even begin to dent what our complete capacity are. We have done in other areas non-solar energy production. We have a solar cell. We have a fuel cell at the sewer plant that provides about 60% of our energy capacity for that 24/7 operation. And we're going to be looking to expand solar energy in areas like we have an old landfill, which I've begun foreclosure proceedings on, about 45 acres. And we hope to expand solar onto that and expand solar into other flat surface areas of city-owned property and buildings.
Mr. Coulter, anything brief to add to what Attorney Steiner said? Mr. Coulter says no, so I think we're open for questions.
Questions of the board regarding this contract? All right, hearing no questions, we will conclude our business with the city today, and we'll move on to item 7, other business. Do members of the board have other business to discuss? Ms. Kennison, Mr. Freund, any advice for your chairman?
No,
I
sir.
have no other business.
Well, what do they say in the House? Mr. Brockman, no other business being before the chamber. We will adjourn subject to the call of the chair or something like that.
You got it.
Make the motion, someone, please. It's Gareth. Hi, everyone.
Ah, my attorney has joined us. If someone would make a motion, that'd be great.
David Biller, so moved.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Hamilton, seconded by Ms. Shaw. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Everyone have a nice day. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you soon.
You're
Yeah.
welcome,
Bye-bye.
Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.